I'm going to make a brief introduction of what was the gathering about in 2017. If not all everybody knows what it was in 2016, the founder of four contemporary Christian contemplative movement, Father Thomas Keaton from Contemplative Outreach, Father Lawrence Freeman from the World Community of Christian Meditation, Father Richard Rohr of the Center for Action and Contemplation, and Tilden Edwards of Charlotte Institute gathered for a week of dialogue and meditation at St. Benedict Monastery in Snowmass. As a result of that meeting, they came up with an extraordinary idea to gather a group of committed younger, let's say, not necessarily with the probably with the same definition of the what the widening group was before saying of the four movement, to share a few days of the practice of contemplative prayer. So each of the founders invited 5 younger members to attend the meeting, which was held in St. Benedict Monastery, Snowmass, Colorado, in August 2017. I think the 3 of us were invited by Father Thomas Keaton. No, you were invited by. You, well, it works. You're no, tell them. Well, Rory and I were invited by Thomas Keaton and Stuart by Tilden. I just want to share 1 minute after giving the mic to both of them, so we can share about what we've been doing after that gathering. Upon my arrival in Snowmass, I think with Mark Tulowitzki was there also. We have a private meeting with Father Thomas Keaton, and in that meeting, I have the first idea of what the gathering was all about. And it was all about connect, to interrelate, to get to know each other. The 5 members of each traditional spiritual movement to get to know other and see where the spirit will lead us. And I think what we might be sharing with you today is what we've been doing from that meeting. So whatever want to start.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. It's good to see everyone. Thanks for coming and for having us. It was a great honor to be not only at that gathering, but also to get to spend so much time with Father Thomas, especially the last decade of his life is when I got to spend most of my time with him. And I just thought of this now. I guess I don't know why I didn't think of it before, but I believe, if I'm recalling right, that our meeting when we were there, and then I stayed a little bit after, I think was the last time I was with Thomas in person. And it's a little emotional. It's a little hard. It wasn't that long after then that he got sick again and got moved to Spencer. And I went to visit at Spencer when he very first got out there, but there were no visitors at that time. And I mean, what would I share? So I would say that the number of things happened in that last meeting, but one of the things that was so clear was being kicked out of the nest. It was like Thomas knew. And I don't know, Thomas thought he was going to die for like 20 years. So he was always almost dying and coming back. But there was a very clear sense in that meeting of like, getting kicked out of the nest. And it was time to go out and kind of embrace what would flow out of the gifts that he had given and he is clearly continuing to give. And so as we kind of share a little bit of what we've been doing since then, I just want to pay a lot of respect to my teacher. I know we don't call people gurus in the Christian tradition, but he was definitely a spiritual master and functioned that way in my relationship with him. um, in some ways in a very traditional way. Um, and so since that time, I've mostly been growing our foundation. So I started a foundation, co-founded it with Adam Bucko, who some of you might know, and Nathaniel Miles Yepes, who just gave a speech on the Snowmass conference in the previous session. And Nathaniel and I have continued to run what's called the Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality. And charis is spelled charis, like Charis. It's actually the Greek word for grace, and also charism. And so our organization was mentioned. I was the administrator for Thomas's Snowmass conference for the final 5 years that it went on. And then our organization has continued in that lineage, the dialogues as well, that we call the Charis Snowmass dialogues, and have continued to hold them. I think we've held 8 or 9 now. The last one was last year in Vermont. And I just kind of mentioned this because that has kind of been the heart, the energy that a lot of our work has grown out of. So in 1984, Thomas started contemplative outreach. Here we are at the 40th anniversary. The same year, he also started what was known as the Snowmass Conference, where he convened a group of spiritual teachers, pretty high level teachers from different religious traditions, and they gathered together and would go on retreat for a week up in Snowmass, usually up at St. Benedict's, and kind of mostly kept everything private, and just delved deep into not only the traditions, but they asked people to come from a place where they were not representing their tradition. They weren't there to be a mouthpiece for Buddhism or for Islam or Hinduism, but to represent their own personal experience of the spiritual journey. And so, and it was really the Snowmass conferences that Brother Wayne Teasdale had in mind when he coined the word inner spiritual. It was really the inspiration for him. This kind of profound, deep sharing of our experiences of ultimate reality with one another. Um, and I think that that is just, I mean, it had a profound effect on me, and in many ways is my tradition. I mean, Christianity and Tibetan Buddhism, and Thomas is my teacher, but my home, I don't really have a home. My home are the places where diverse people gather together um, to share their deepest experiences and their hearts with one another. And what we found is there's a transmission and an energy in that um, that is not different from the energy of centering prayer and the transformative journey, um, and that can be harnessed still and used in different ways to continue this work that doesn't happen just within the Christian tradition, doesn't happen just outside of it, but where that tradition becomes one piece among a very rich and larger conversation um, that is in many ways just beginning. You know, I often think that we're like, you know, Greeks 2,000 years ago staring up at the night sky and looking at all the stars and trying to figure out what is this celestial realm that we're actually coming into contact with. And we make various theories and then we live them and test them out over the years, over thousands of years. And today, you know, it's mind-blowing what we've discovered, and we're still just babies. So I think of this work as like being baby astrophysicists in some ways. And there's so much to learn and discover, but we can only do it in deep intimacy with one another. And when we come to a place where we can pool our insights and our energies and our hearts into a kind of united, woven heart, and then allow a new world to grow out of that space and to continue forward. And so that has really been the heart and the energy that we have tried to stay true to within our foundation. and to carry on that part of this work. And so, check my time here. Um, where to go from here? I forget even what we do because we have a bunch of projects. So I had to like call it up here. And I'll just name a few of them, and maybe more than a few to just kind of give you an idea. One has been continuation of the Snowmass dialogues. So we continue to do those. You know, and I would say a very important point to this work to just bring it forward is its organic nature. So it's very different from saying, this is our mission and we're going to go out and do it. We may know the mission, we may know the direction of it, we may know what it smells like more than anything else. But then there's a sense of patience and a sense of organic movement. It's that movement of the spirit that we continually learn in centering prayer that just gets deeper and deeper and deeper in our practice, especially as we put in years and even decades of work. And it's allowing the space and the trust for that organic process to move. And we found that that has actually been very, very fruitful. It's definitely not doing just nothing. And so some of the other projects we've put together, we've developed an interspiritual version of centering prayer that we call Charis Meditation, which basically just means, you know, learning to teach the centering prayer method, which we feel is very powerful and deep and very particularly pertinent to the modern lives we live today. The psychological framework behind it, and is one of the few contemplative spiritual practices that emerge from thousands of years of tradition, and yet at the same time was particularly developed for people living modern lives outside of the monastery today, starting off with 20 minutes twice a day and then extending that till you can do maybe an hour twice a day. But a lot of our techniques were built for monks who could practice 24/7, didn't have to worry about financial realities, didn't have to go to a job, have relationships, families. Um, I think this technique is particularly helpful for these kinds of lives. So we're trying to spread it to a lot of people we think it can be helpful for who may not just be in the Christian tradition or be in the Christian tradition, but it doesn't stop at the Christian tradition, its usefulness. So we've also developed something called Charis Circles that I'll be talking about in the third session. We'll do a little experiment of it, but this is kind of harnessing that interspiritual version of Charis meditation, but combining it to create interspiritual communities of practice. So to actually form a community where you can have people from diverse walks of life, diverse pasts, diverse traditions, some people from no tradition, yet have a practice to do together. And it's kind of combined with a communal Lectio Divina practice after that I think that we have found has been quite successful in weaving a community among the diversity, allowing everyone's voices to be heard, allowing insights to be heard, but without anything dominating the kind of practice. Um, we're developing an interspiritual formation, which would be kind of the beginning of a 2-year sort of formation. It may extend to more like long-term new monastic formation. Um, we have a center at Naropa University with hopes of maybe spreading to other universities called the Keating Schachter Center for Interspirituality. And it in particular supports bringing in real spiritual teachers from different traditions into the community and and also the staff to really offer genuine wisdom to students and to the people there. We also do a seminar called the Thomas Keating Interspiritual Seminars, a podcast called the New Monastics Podcast, and a Heartfire Festival for a music festival of spiritual teachers. And I better stop talking now and pass it on to my colleagues. So thank you.
So I want to start by whenever we were there and we each would go in small groups and visit with Father Thomas that whenever we were in there with our small group, he said something, and I went back and found my journal. I had kept a little journal for those 5 or 6 days that we were there, and I went back and found this because it felt really, really true. So he said this. He said, "At some point, there ceases to be two, not mathematically per se, but that we participate so fully in the divine life that while there may be a distinction, there is no separation," which I thought was just wonderful. And at that point, when we were there, I was 10 years into being a parish priest, which is just long enough to know that you know nothing. It's a really sweet spot. You have been told by enough people that you know nothing to really go into this space. So those 6 days that we were there, that really was where I was how do you take this? How do you absorb this, and how do you go back? How do I go back into my parish? Which my parish is 45 minutes north from here. It's about 1,000 people in a preschool. So I was really taking notes about both myself and also how I could translate this into my own parish work, into my parish life. And what would that look like? Because when I first went to my parish, they were very quick to tell me we have had a group meet here for about 5 or 6 years, and I got to tell you, I've actually never gone to that group. I've never gone to them because they've been doing their own really rich work, and I didn't want to barge in there and mess that up. So for 11 years now, I've kind of worked with them from the outside, wondering what they were doing, but also looking at my role as their priest. What does it look like day to day? And how do you take these uh, teachings and these insights and actually translate it and embody that within a parish so that it's not just for those who are kind of into that sort of thing, who go over and have their own separate groups. But I really saw my work as how do you take this and actually translate this into how does this insight change the way decisions are made? We actually have a lot of leeway in how we structure things in our churches. We just don't think that we do. They've always been done a certain way, and so we just kind of inherit that and keep that going and try to pour into it what we can pour into it. But I'm enough of an anarchist that I really wanted to come back from this and build on work that I had done for years and really look at it and wonder. So that's where I found myself, in the work since then, is really looking at congregational life, really looking at that. And then having the chance last year being invited on the faculty here has been another fascinating piece of it. And my two friends are sitting right up there who were both in class with me. So that's been another piece of this is when you are in a group of folks who are studying, going through what is a hazing, it feels like so much. How does this matter? What does this matter for people who are studying to be priests, for people who are studying to be, clergy? What does it matter so that we can ask ourselves what actually feeds our souls? How do we stay grounded when so much is changing in the church? So many people have, no interest in it at all. What does that look like? Why why is that key? And it was something that actually Lawrence said whenever we were there. There was one night, we stayed at one night way, way late. I won't say all that we did, but we stayed at one night way, way late. But Lawrence made this comment, and he said that um, we have amphibious identities, was the phrase that Lawrence used. And I remember, and he and I locked eyes, and that really felt true to me. I'm a parish priest. I teach at, a seminary, and then the heart of my own life is this deeply, contemplative vein. And how do those mix? How do they not mix? how does my, contemplative heart actually shape and transform the way I live my life as a parish priest, the way I live my life with my friends at school? How does that matter? What does that matter? So that's really been the bulk of my work, I think, in the past 10 years at Grace, in the past 7 since we were there, is trying to make sense of that. And I think a key piece of that, what it lets me do, and I'd be curious to see what the two of you think. I think the time that we were there let me take risks in my own context in a way that maybe I would not have done so. I felt like whenever we were there, even for that short time and the time that we've all stayed in touch, and have, like you said, been kicked out of the nest, which that really felt true. How have I felt myself take more risks? I felt like I could come back and know I'm not the only person who feels this and wonders this. I'm not the only person whose heart really yearns for that. And so I can trust that and see where that see how that takes me forward.
Thank you, Stuart. Well, I just want uh, to reflect a little bit because when I saw the all the bios that we shared before, I was saying, what am I doing here? I'm not a scholar. I'm not a spiritual leader. I'm not a priest. I was just an ordinary guy, a practitioner, basically of center in prayer. And I asked that same question to Father Thomas Kidd. I say, Father, what I'm doing there, I feel like I don't fit in here. We are this guy who has a lot of years of experience. Have some of them have written books, and he say, no, 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 you're a very important matter. I was just probably recently married with a kid, and he said, you do an extraordinary work in your ordinary life. So um, I think that put me in perspective of what we are doing as a practitioner, and we feel a very important role in transmitting the contemplation to the real world and to the real life. And that's what I'm trying to be doing in the last couple of years. It tricks me a lot. How can we integrate contemplation practices into our public sphere? I do a lot of. Uh, I'm a lawyer, as you know. I tend to to deal with a lot of stuff in political, economic, and businesses. So how can we transmit those practice uh, even in my private life as a husband, as a father? How can transmit those like, because I most of the time I just lose it. My full self arise, but every time I just sit, I will say that's my medicine. If I wouldn't have no contemplative outreach 20 years ago, I don't know where I was going to be. So I'm really thankful. I'm really grateful uh, to have been this privilege to know. And what we're trying to do in my country is just transmit. We always say, we are not spiritual leader at all. We are not scholars or whatever. We just transmit this precious gift that we have received. Uh, be able to sit. And I think uh, reflecting, hearing you here with our colleagues today is that I think that meeting was important because the connection, and what we are doing this celebrating this 40th anniversary of contemplative reach is try to reconnect again with this new generation. I think we are in a tipping point where uh, some of more experience are retiring, and how we're gonna transmit in the next future. And I think the connection, what we do from now on, it's gonna lead to the next step, and we have to trust the spirit. And I think that that was the meeting all about. Try to connect. Some of us uh, have been in touch and have been doing. And in my case, I just been helping and serving. the circle server of ECIs, how to serve the Spanish and Portuguese communities in which is really diverse, a lot of cultures, and we just listened a lot the community. We have to sit, listen, and prayer. And for me, that's been honor, very humble, being able to serve in that circle, and being here just to share with all of you in this conference. I think the pandemic have brought our eyes again the importance of connection, the importance to be in person, to relate in a more intimate manner. I think that's what at least for me gives. We need this. We need be share, know what we're doing in a more intimate manner, and let's see where the spirit led us. We probably will don't know. We have a lot of things to do, but in some of the question, I think it's about attraction, not a promotion. And so I think the only way to be attracted is to get to know each other. If we do to know each other, we will not be able to, fulfill whatever dreams or whatever the spirit will go. So I just encourage to all of us to continue this connection that we all have a lot of means in right now with the social media, emails, WhatsApp, whatever. Just be touched to connect and see where the things go. So I don't know if I think we have time to comment and see what maybe discussion, question, comments we might be able to go from here. Um, I would like to add something that the steward said about the risk. I totally agree with you. I mean, after that conference, uh, it's just being able to feel the unknown. I mean, to have this confidence and in the unknown. I think that's it. That 20 minutes. I'm a Christian, so I tend to see the. But as Father Thomas says, and I really uh, love the way he was able to include the this inter spiritual community. So no matter what are your belief, if you know what your belief and you're sitting together, that's fine. So I think that's the beauty of this, and that helped me to be in peace. Sometimes like he says, um if you have more than 30 seconds thinking about something, you're a bit more neurotic. So I try to be like that. Sometimes I don't do it, but always try to think about that. So yes, it led me to be more risky and have more confidence in the unknown, basically.
I think we're going to go to, I mean, we'd love to do some questions and answers. Just to respond to what Raphael was saying, and I think, and what you were kind of saying, Stuart, but it strikes me that, the biggest thing that I think probably all of us have been doing, I mean, I mentioned a lot of things, projects and stuff, but really what we've been doing is practicing. And the impetus that being at some of these gatherings or seeing Thomas, that gives you the confidence in the transformative process that this is real, that what you're experiencing from him is real. And it's at the heart of everything we do. And so it gives us the fortitude to continue the journey through the hardest of times, to come back rain and shine to our practice life. And who knows what will grow out of it. I mean, Thomas was a monk doing prayer most of the time. Here he is all over the world. It's not the work in the world doesn't come from us figuring out and doing it. It flows from the practice, and at its best looks like doing nothing. And who cares what it looks like for any one person? Whatever's happening in your life is exactly where you're supposed to be, and the work that you're called to do in that moment to serve the whole world. And it doesn't, that's all that really matters. So that's what kind of came up for me. Thanks.
So, what thoughts does anyone have that they want to share? Yeah. And do you need a microphone where people can hear you?
I mean, it's centering prayer, but it's more in the nuance of how it's presented. So it's been my practice for many, many years. Pat Johnson knows, some 20 some years ago, going to St. Benedict's. And also my partner in the work, Natanel, was kind of apprenticed by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, but also did centering prayer. And we never trained in contemplative outreach to teach centering prayer. So there's a certain kind of, rigor or repetition that needs to be done when you're doing that. But so we kind of come from doing the practice a lot, but not out of the training in contemplative outreach. And so when I say that it's an inner spiritual version, it's not centering prayer, but it's just the nuance of presenting it. It doesn't have to all be in Christian language. It doesn't have to all be in Christian garb, though it's important to recognize that that's its tradition and that's its origin. And part of it's maybe my own journey. I'm just very comfortable in the language of the spirit, in Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism and Zen. And I've also had Hindu teachers. So it's like giving permission to people as you teach it to find their own doorway in. You know, yeah. I'm not familiar with 12 step, but I think it is. Yeah. It's just, it doesn't take much. It's, are you consenting to the spirit? Are we touching into awakened mind? Is this just life itself that's guiding you? But how do you find that place? And then we just begin to access it in the prayer life. And the psychological experience is the psychological experience. It's going to happen. Um, so I don't think it's a huge shift, but it's something that I don't think could have happened very much in Thomas's time. I mean, there was a reason these strands had to stay somewhat separate. I mean, the Catholic Church was coming down on a lot of people. Somehow, some miracle that they never came down on Thomas. They'd come down on St. Benedict sometime, and they'd have to pull back, and this was happening all over. And it was renewing the contemplative life of the Christian church and the Christian tradition, and that couldn't be risked. And so there was we don't live in the same era now. It's not the same, and it doesn't have the same mystique. So perhaps it's a time they can come together a little more fully.
The very first inner spiritual uh, conference that Thomas called in October of '84 that Rory talked about, he called that together because of two different recognitions. The first recognition was that in having all of these leaders of the different traditions come together in a space that was safe and sacred, every single one of those leaders Thomas recognized were lonely. The second recognition was that every single tradition has in common meditation. So they could all meet together in that meditation room in silence and do their own practice, but it was all meditation.
Where are the documents from the snow mass, or where are they going to be archived here, or are there documents, or because that's part of the conversation that's gone on this weekend? So
There's a book, The Common Heart, that my Natanel wrote actually and put together. Wonderful book, highly recommend it. They did not, the first 20 years, they said, we're not going to put anything in public, like, because they wanted the freedom to really explore without having to worry about what your congregation or the other people in your tradition might say. And I think that was part of how it rooted such a deep spiritual energy, really, and even what I would call a transmission. Um, After that, I have a few things. One thing we do have, and I have talked to a few people in the archives that I do think is pretty cool, is in 2012, I had come in a video crew, and we have TV level video, professional video and audio of most of the conference that year. And they did an hour-long PBS documentary on global spirit on it. And it's okay. They had to kind of create a storyline. It doesn't quite capture the spirit of the dialogues, but it's something. But there's not a ton of, they weren't like taking notes. You can see the 10 points of agreement are really wonderful. There's a couple documents. There's documents on practice. But it's mostly the experience of being in that space together.
I had a question, Rory. You mentioned Lectio Divina, and I wonder if you had expanded the definition beyond Christian scripture.
Yeah, I mean, Lectio Divina in the Christian tradition is a very particular practice. You have, different levels of scripture and allegorical and literal, but it's really just spiritual reading. It's a certain way of reading. In the Charis circles, what we do is a kind of that inner spiritual centering prayer, meditation practice, silent, and then it's if anyone knows collatio, it's actually an ancient Christian monastic practice. I learned from the monks at New Camaldoli Hermitage. We do a kind of collatio practice that works in a group, but it doesn't mean the reading has to be Christian. I mean, there's a skill to picking out a spiritual reading, but you can have different readings, and it's a communal Lectio Divina that allows everyone's voice to come forth, kind of in a movement of the Spirit, allows everyone to be heard, and allows people to share their perspectives, I think, in a quite beautiful way, and also a contained way, so it doesn't get so that everyone is sort of just contributing to what's being built in the middle.
So one of the things that Thomas spoke about whenever we were there was how people, and this is such a phenomenon within institutions. So churches are notorious about this. You fall into a pattern in what you do over time. We all do. I mean, I love to hear, a Baptist say we don't have a liturgy. You do have a liturgy, because if you sing a hymn at the wrong time, you will very fast tell, the pastor that they did that the wrong way. So we all make these patterns. And so one of the things that, that Thomas laughed about at one of those things was he said how people will fall into the practice if I'm not using my word the right way, I'm doing this wrong. And he was like, well, who said you have to use a word? Like, use your breath, use, a candle. I mean, it's the posture. So I think we always have to gauge that to say, there's something in us right now in the world that we live. We start to sort things. What is in, what is out, what is right, what is wrong, what is, and we kind of create. I mean, I tell my parish all the time, like, we have a temple cult, and as long as the temple cult continues going on and our people can come and pay someone to make the sacrifice for them, then they can go on about their lives and trust that they're going to be safe. And we're breaking out of that. We're being dragged out of that. And I think we find, hints of that in different ways. And I think more and more I see this as a posture. This is a posture. that lets us pivot and be nimble to respond to what presents itself to us, no matter if it's a hurricane or what. I mean, it's real life. And so I think part of what we see in groups even is this, to say, I mean, the questions that we automatically ask, like, poetry does this. You can barely go into an Episcopal church without hearing, a Mary Oliver poem. I mean, and you start to hear, and then, but where's the line, right? Where's the line on what's a Christian poem and not a Christian poem? Or a spiritual poem or not a spiritual poem? And so I think this, where we find ourselves right now, is really pushing against some of that. And we have to ask ourselves, what is it in us that's making me want to have that line be firm? That's the really deep work. Like, why am I stirred up and I want to make sure, for those of us who have a bishop, that's a whole other story. But that's an easy answer. But we're really called to do our work right now and to ask ourselves, what is it in me when my fear gets piqued? What is it in me that's making me say, I want to make sure that my sources are straight.
Well, hi, my question is from before, but I'll find it. The best segue I can come up with is that my Episcopal church recently quoted the Grateful Dead. So, so you can come visit, come to Philly. But I'm backing up a little bit to the evolution of the Snowmass dialogues. I'm very, very intrigued and curious about how what began as this by invitation only certain level of spiritual acuity, this elite behind closed doors, to inviting mentees. That was a big deal to invite mentees. But this idea of nobody, I understand the reason for that was to allow these spiritual leaders to let their hair down and love one another and be real. I get all of that. But then to hear that you had cameras in there, oh my goodness, like TV cameras, like I'm curious on how that changed the dynamic. And I'm curious about how the Charis circles are. How do you navigate this idea of who's invited, who's not invited?
So those are great questions. And it was a ruckus bringing in the TV cameras, Sometimes you say yes, then people freak out when it actually happens. But it worked well. They actually said they thought it was the best dialogue they ever had that year. There was just a power to it. I don't think it had anything to do with the cameras, but just turned out that way. So with great respect to what was formed in those Snowmass dialogues, because it's an energy and a transmission, at least that's how I feel it, and probably couldn't have been produced any other way. When we began to do the dialogues in a new iteration, we did make some substantive changes. So for the older dialogues, it was very, very important for them that the person was from a tradition and fully established in a tradition. So much the case that the person who wrote the book, Nathaniel Miles Yepes, never went to one because he wasn't necessarily this or that. He was actually Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. He's a great rabbi, did dialogue. His direct apprentice and successor, but Rabbi Zalman initiated him as a Sufi sheikh. So Nathaniel's the head of a Sufi lineage. That's kind of a universalist lineage, Pir Vilayat Khans. So Hazarat. There were other spiritual teachers they didn't want to invite in. So we felt that the times called that just wasn't the case anymore. That there were very deep people who might be in more than one tradition or not in a tradition. The other thing that wasn't on their radar was any kind of diversity other than religious diversity. So they had a lot of religious diversity, but we're not looking for other kinds of diversity. And our dialogues, we try very hard to have an equal number of men and women, first of all, which we learned completely changes the dialogue and the atmosphere. And there's just no other way to reproduce bodies in a room or bodies in a room. And when you have half or more women, it changes the atmosphere, it changes the nature of the dialogue, and there's no other way to do it. So, and it seems hard at first because everyone before has been men, so all the names that come up, but it's just hard work for the first couple years, and then all of a sudden it just like something breaks and it just flows, and then it's not so much it's easy then. And we also aim for racial, cultural, and ethnic diversity as much as we can. So those are innovations we made, and then it is still kind of elite. I mean, it's just a fact you can't do more than really 12 people, and we go do 5 days. You do less than 5 days, doesn't work the same. And if you do more than 12 people, doesn't work the same. And so we've learned that. We have recorded all of our dialogues, and at some point wish to transcribe and edit them so they can be part of a larger conversation. Some of them have been quite amazing. And then the last point I'd just make is a lot of work goes into curating the attendees. So it's not just about there's a lot of great spiritual leaders who cannot dialogue at all. They just can't, or they can't drop the mask for whatever reason. So we try to pick people. We have particular topics that we really think are going to be able to work well together, and we try.
Rory, I remember when you finished the Young Contemplatives, you and I discussing in the kitchen, your guys's and girls and women's observations were the same as mine running retreats for all those years, which was that we had no people of color in, I could have counted on one hand people of color coming over 35 years, and you didn't have any in the 20 people of the 4 different leaders picks. So out of that, though, I think because we were all observing this, came Colleen's work with BIPAC. So the need keeps determining what the function is.
First of all, I just want to thank you guys. It's really been wonderful. And to Stuart, I just love this term. I think you said it, amphibious identities. Love that term because I just thought anybody who's come back from a 10-day retreat and walked in their front door knows what an amphibious identity is, right? And to you, Roy, no, when the new monasticism, your book came out, I probably had it for 10 years now. I love the book, and I always wondered where the movement went. So I've heard little things, but it's really good to hear that now there are Kara circles and opportunities, and maybe if we have if we have some time, maybe you can just talk a little bit more about, what that movement is, who you're attracting, where the people are located, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And to you, Raphael, I wanted to say, I don't know if this was like just if you thought about this comment or it came out, but I loved it when you were talking about ECI, and you said, it's many cultures within all these countries, and you said, and our response is we sit, we listen, and we pray. I mean, I think you saying that is just reinforces where our new council wants to be. You guys are modeling for us to be able to sit, listen, and pray. I think that's a new, 40 years, letting go, starting something new. But I think the 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 movement of contemplative outreach, I think that's where it's headed. So thank you so much for doing that.